I'll probably be long gone, but when Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are in their care homes decades hence, I think it'll be the case that the nurse leaning over either of them will be saying, "Who's this Liz Truss, dear, that you keep talking about?" So, Maddie, you were in the Commons watching Rachel Reeves when she gave her spring forecast, not spring statement, but essentially it was the Chancellor's opportunity to have half an hour at the dispatch box outlining her economic strategy and her forecasts for the future. Rachel Reeves took something of a battering when she had her budget last autumn. Kemi Badenoch had her for breakfast. But this time round, it was a slightly different Rachel Reeves.
Well, it was slightly more bullish. She definitely had a lot more vim than I have seen her have for some time. But I think it helped that fundamentally she wasn't doing anything difficult. She wasn't making any tough decisions. She was simply reiterating political talking points and saying how fantastic everything was in the economy. But if there are problems in the economy, it's all the fault of the Tories, Liz Truss mini budget, blah, blah, blah. We've heard it all 1,000 times before. So although she did a kind of strong performance, the content of what she was saying felt like nothing new. Although actually she did kind of open her statement by saying, like in very sort of hostage video style, this government has the right economic plan for our country. And everyone just lost the plot in the chamber because of the way she said it in a very vacant manner. But yeah, I think she certainly rallied. I think there's also, I guess, a question for her about the wisdom, I think, of taking a self-congratulatory tone, because she was talking about economic forecasts, some of which have been upgraded on the last time that they were made, and saying, well, this is proof that everything's going fantastically well. But, famously, the economic forecasters are invariably wrong about everything.
Yes.
To tie your political flag to the mast of the OBR seems a bit like basing your future public policy on, bird entrails or something, because they're invariably wrong. So I think that was kind of a misstep, or at least something she may come to regret, because what if it gets downgraded? What happens then?
I share your scepticism about the wisdom of relying on the OBR's forecasts. As has been pointed out, if you compare them with other forecasting organisations, they have one of the worst records. And notoriously, it was the case that J.K. Galbraith said that economic forecasting was introduced in order to make astrology seem respectable. But if all of the stats that you actually have are quite grim,
yes,
and at least the forecasts give you some hint of sunshine to come,
yes,
then you'll want to move away from the grim news, for example, on unemployment, and indeed the fact that growth's been downgraded this year, towards the sunnier prospects that appear to be the case with growth in the future. So I can understand why she did it, but I didn't get the sense, please tell me if I'm wrong, that within the forecast there was much detail about what the government's long-awaited growth strategy might be.
No, and some of the figures that she was crowing about were, by any normal historical UK standards, anemic and nothing to shout about. So in the short term, the immediate forecasts have been downgraded for the year 2026, but they get better, slightly better after that. And this is partly because there's an assumption of spending cuts in the run-ups to the next general election.
Like that's going to happen.
Now, I wonder about that, because, so far this government has shown that when there's a difficult economic decision to be made or a backbench rebellion, they reach not for the difficult cuts, but for the tax increases, which are not fantastic for stimulating growth and investment. And I don't trust Labour MPs necessarily to wear these proposals, even if it's something that Rachel Reeves would very much like them to do. And actually, the faces on many Labour MPs during the statement, well, they looked fairly grim to me. They didn't look happy at all points. That they did grow animated at certain moments, but it was generally when the Chancellor was talking about some kind of spending increase, such as the removal of the two-child benefit cap. And, although the Chancellor talked a lot about the state of the public finances that they inherited, nowhere was there any recognition that this government has increased the national debt by almost £200 billion since they took power. Blaming it on the other guy's strategy does have its limits. I wonder if there's a kind of statute of limitations of a point at which governments are just not allowed to blame the opposition for their predicaments, or to at least take some responsibility for what's happening.
Maybe there should be, but I can foresee, I'll probably be long gone, but when Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are in their care homes decades hence. I think it'll be the case that the nurse leaning over either of them will be saying, "Who's this Liz Truss, dear, that you keep talking about?" Because it's a name never off their lips. And if Liz wondered if she would ever achieve immortality in politics, then I think she can be grateful.
It's almost
if that's the right
It's almost 4 years since the budget.
I know, but it is for Labour the gift that keeps on giving, because it's the invocation of economic chaos that they will continually use in order to say, however bad you may think we are, the other side were irredeemably worse. But again, the more you talk about how bad the other guys were, the more obvious it is that the positive arguments about what you're doing appear to be evanescent.
The other thing that just struck me today, because, of course, when this spring forecast was announced, they couldn't have known that, events Dear Boy would kick off.
Yes, quite.
But there is also the question of just using these particular forecasts whilst kind of ignoring what further conflict in the Middle East could mean for the UK, food and energy inflation. That could grow worse, and it almost certainly will, unless there really is a swift cessation of hostilities. So it made the forecast, which always feel very like back of fag packet and a bit even more redundant than they normally do.
Yes, and I think that again it's making bricks with as little straw as there is, and so using whatever hand-me-down or whatever inadequate stats come to hand in order to try to create the impression of solidity.
And also we've touched on it before, but it has become clear at the last budget that the government has made a choice that we are going to neglect our military in favour of pumping more and more money into the welfare state. They won't admit to that, but that is exactly what is happening. And It doesn't matter, apparently, what else goes on in the world, how chaotic and dangerous a place it becomes. Nothing seems to shake them from that belief. And I couldn't help but think that this felt even more irresponsible given everything else that was happening.
I think that's right. And at different times, including, I think, almost exactly a year ago, after Trump's inauguration, it was the case that Labour were talking then about the vital importance of national security and so on. And they have made noises about investment in defence, but we know from what the defence chiefs are saying, even if you take it with a pinch of salt, that it's nowhere near enough to meet the requirements that NATO and other allies expect of us. And again, the revealed preference of the Labour government is if a spare pound can be found and the choice is welfare or defence, then it will go on welfare.
Yes.
And even those areas that Rachel Reeves mentioned where there is reform occurring, small r, like, for example, over special educational needs, whatever one thinks of the details of the proposition that has been put forward by Bridget Phillipson, it's still the case that in the short term, definitely, it will see spending increase. So what we're not seeing is really any measure of economy in any area, and that means your earlier point about the assumption that there will be public spending reductions in advance of the general election seems more fantastical. And all the political pressure that occurs in the wake of the Gorton and Denton by-election would appear to be for Labour to move to the left economically. I think one of the things that Reeves was trying to do was to try to remind Labour backbenchers why they should be cheerful about being Labour by scorning the Tory record and talking about the two-child benefit cap being lifted. But if you make people feel better by saying, look how much we're spending, then you create a path and a path dependency which takes you away from the overall spending control in most departments that you will need to satisfy the markets and to invest in defence.
Yes, and also she kept reiterating the importance of sticking to the plan and all of that, which I felt was an attempt to reach out to her backbenchers and say, we are making progress, but also, look, we can spend more on welfare. But kind of an audition for please don't eject me and the dear leader just yet because things are getting better. I'm not sure how persuasive that is. I know we've talked about it being something of a non-event, but given the build-up to the last big fiscal event, I mean, isn't that something of a relief? The amount of uncertainty and speculation and the damage that did to businesses that feverishly wondering for months what on earth is coming. Do you think that the decision to have just one of those per year is a sensible one?
Well, it's certainly the case. You're absolutely right that the Treasury and the government wanted this to be dull and as close to a non-event in economic terms as possible. And last week they briefed the Financial Times saying that it would be boring. And the Financial Times had a headline, which is boring statement, page 3. I think only the Financial Times would herald something as boring and therefore a must read. Well, maybe the New Statesman would as well, I don't know. Anyway, the broader point, though, about the sense of political satisfaction they might derive from that, I understand. But I remember George Osborne, when he was Chancellor, saying to me that the Treasury always told him that we just want one big fiscal event, 2 is destabilising, then we can concentrate on getting it right. And he thought, why the hell would I want to restrict my ability to command the narrative and to push things forward in a way that I believe in to just once a year? It's a classic example of what the Treasury want and what the machine wants, not necessarily being in line with what a reformer, even if you disagree with the reform, should want. So there may be an admirable fidelity to Treasury orthodoxy in Rachel Reeves' decision, but it's a missed opportunity.